The Solvari did not believe in wars. Wars were expensive, unpredictable, and left the infrastructure of conquered worlds in a condition that required decades of remediation. Queen Versh had reviewed the historical record of conventional military conquest across 4-star systems, and concluded, with the analytical precision that had defined her reign, that the entire enterprise was architecturally unsound. You did not need to break a civilization to own it. You needed only to redirect it, gently, incrementally, until it was moving in the direction you had always intended and believed it had chosen the route itself. The core had taken a generation to build. 43 Solvari emissaries, trained from early childhood in the full spectrum of human social behavior: language, humor, cultural register, the precise calibration of warmth and distance that made a person feel simultaneously understood and slightly indebted. They were not weapons in any sense that a weapons treaty would recognize. They were, on paper, cultural liaisons. The paperwork was immaculate. Versh watched the deployment from the orbital station with the satisfaction of an architect watching a building go up exactly as drawn. 12 cities, 12 points of administrative influence. The operation was designed to run for 18 months before producing measurable results, and she was a patient woman. In a mid-sized administrative hub 200 kilometers inland, a civil infrastructure analyst named Darian Cole was assigned a new liaison from the Solvari Cultural Exchange Office on a Tuesday morning. He was given a briefing document, an access protocol, and a meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock. He read the briefing document twice, wrote 3 questions in the margin, and arrived at the meeting 2 minutes early with a notepad and the expression of a man who had decided to be professionally courteous about absolutely everything. The liaison's name was Sira. She was composed, precise, and possessed of the particular quality of attention that made people feel as though they were the most interesting thing in the room. Darian noticed this, wrote nothing about it, and asked his 3 questions. She answered them thoroughly. He thanked her and requested the source documentation. She provided it. He reviewed it and found 2 minor discrepancies in the resource projection figures, which he flagged in a formal memo with the same tone he used for everything: not accusatory, not suspicious, simply procedurally thorough. Sira filed her first report to the orbital station that evening. The anomaly, she noted, was not hostility. It was something she did not have a precise operational category for. Versh read the report and made a note of her own. 6 weeks into the operation, Sira's reports on Darian Cole occupied a category that the Solvari Influence Assessment System had not been designed to process. He had not resisted. He had not complained. He had not raised any concern that could be addressed, neutralized, or redirected. He had simply continued to do his job with the steady, unhurried attention of a man who had decided long ago what his job actually was and had not since been persuaded otherwise. He asked questions. This was the core of the problem. Not aggressive questions, not rhetorical questions deployed as resistance, genuine, procedural, specific questions that required genuine, procedural, specific answers. Every proposal that moved through his desk was examined on its own terms. Every projection was checked against existing data. Every request for expedited approval was met with the same pleasant, immovable response. The process existed for a reason, and he found it worked best when followed. He is not obstructing the operation, Sira reported. He is simply not accelerating it. Every metric that depends on his division is proceeding at standard pace. He does not appear to understand that standard pace is insufficient for our timeline. Does he suspect anything? Versh asked. A pause. I don't believe he thinks in those terms. He appears to treat all external requests with identical scrutiny. I have found no evidence that we receive more skepticism than anyone else. Versh considered this. In 3 prior planetary campaigns, resistance had presented as ideology, tribalism, institutional protectionism. She had strategies for all of these. They were, at their core, emotional responses, and emotional responses had leverage points. What does he respond to? She asked. Accuracy, Sira said. Consistency, evidence that a process has been thought through. Versh was quiet for a moment. Those are not leverage points, she said. No, Sira agreed. They are not. Versh looked out at the curve of the planet below the station and felt something she did not have a ready operational category for either. She began, quietly, to make arrangements. The inspection visit was announced through official channels with 2 weeks' notice and a perfectly plausible administrative justification. Versh arrived in the city as a senior Solvari cultural attaché, which was accurate in the way that a great many true things can be accurate without being complete. She had not descended to a planetary surface during a campaign since her second operation, 12 years ago, when a structural anomaly in the influence network had required direct assessment. She told herself this was the same kind of situation. She met Darian Cole in a scheduled coordination meeting on a Thursday afternoon. He stood when she entered, which was courtesy, and shook her hand, which was human custom, and then sat back down and looked at her with the calm, attentive expression she had been reading about in Sierra's reports for 6 weeks. "I understand you're reviewing the exchange program's integration with municipal infrastructure," he said. "Among other things," she said, "I have some questions about the resource reallocation framework in the Phase 2 documentation," he said. "If you have time." She had, technically, an orbital station, a 43-person operation, and the administrative future of a planet to attend to. "Of course," she said. They spent 90 minutes going through the documentation. He had annotated his copy in the margins with the small, precise handwriting of someone who took notes for himself rather than for an audience. His questions were not traps. They were not performances. They were questions that had occurred to him because he had read the material carefully, and he asked them because he wanted the answers. And he wanted the answers because he believed they were relevant to doing his job correctly. At one point, she gave an answer that was technically accurate but strategically framed, and he looked at her for a moment and said, "That addresses the quarterly projection, but not the baseline methodology. Can you walk me through the baseline?" She walked him through the baseline. He thanked her and made a note. Versh returned to her temporary offices that evening and sat with the particular stillness of a person processing a realization they had been approaching for some time. Her operation was designed for a specific model of human psychology, one that responded to attention, to the social warmth of being understood, to the subtle pressure of incremental obligation. It was a good model. It was accurate for the overwhelming majority of the population. It had worked in various forms on 3 worlds. Darian Cole was not a different species. He was not a superhuman. He was a man who had, somewhere in his unremarkable life, developed the habit of thinking carefully before agreeing to things, and who applied that habit without exception, and who was entirely impervious to the operation not because he had identified it, but because the operation had nothing to offer him that he wanted more than his own judgment. She had no strategy for that. She had never needed one. She thought about this for a long time. The operation did not end in a confrontation. It ended the way Versh had privately known it would end since the Thursday meeting, not with a battle or an exposure or a dramatic reversal, but with a slow, structural recognition that the timeline was no longer viable and the variables were no longer behaving as modeled. It was not Darian's fault, precisely. He had never organized anything. He had never given a speech or written a manifesto or done anything that could be classified as leadership in any conventional sense. He had simply been, consistently and without apparent effort, the kind of person who thought before he agreed, and the people who worked near him had, over months of proximity, begun doing the same thing. Not because he told them to, because it was, when observed up close and over time, a reasonable way to operate. Versh called Sierra into her office on a gray morning in the 9th week and told her to begin filing the suspension paperwork. Sierra received this without surprise and with the particular professional composure of someone who had seen it coming and had not said so. "Do you want me to document the anomaly?" Sierra asked. "Yes," Versh said. "Document it accurately. The next team that reviews this file should understand what they are looking at." She requested a formal meeting with Darian Cole that afternoon under the genuine pretense of closing out the Phase 1 review. He arrived on time with his annotated copy of the documentation. She had decided, on the walkover, to be honest with him, not entirely, not in a way that would require her to answer for things she was not prepared to answer for yet, but honest in the specific sense of having a real conversation instead of a managed one. She told him that the cultural exchange program was being restructured. He said that made sense given some of the baseline methodology issues. She said that she had found the review process more instructive than anticipated. He said that was usually how it went when the documentation was worth reading carefully. Then he looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated attention she had come to recognize as simply the way he looked at things. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes," she said. "What were you actually trying to accomplish?" The question sat between them in the quiet of the office. Through the window, the city continued its unremarkable operations, people moving through the afternoon with the particular purposeful randomness of a place that did not know it had been the site of anything unusual. Versh looked at him for a moment, then she said, "Something I should have approached differently from the beginning." Darian nodded slowly, in the way of someone filing an answer that was incomplete but offered in good faith. "Okay," he said. "That's a reasonable place to start." She looked at him across the table. A civil infrastructure analyst with a notepad and a habit of thinking carefully, who had dismantled an interplanetary influence operation not through